After my dad walked out, my mom got engaged to a man who refused to let me move. In and now, she shamelessly expects me to sacrifice my inheritance for him. Hey everyone, this is my first time posting on Reddit, and I really need your advice because I'm lost. I just turned 15 3 days ago, and my grandma gave me a really special, wonderful gift. She transferred the ownership of her penthouse apartment to me. My grandma doesn't live there. She lives in the suburbs but has owned the apartment for a couple of years and stays there occasionally when she wants to be close to the city. I was really thrilled because, so far, this past year and a half has been terrible for me. First, my dad walked out on our family. He had always been a bit of a workaholic and never had time for me or my mom. But even then, this came as a huge shock to me. My mother didn't tell me about it until my dad moved out of the house silently almost a year ago. Apparently, they had already filed for divorce by the time they told me, and my parents had decided they couldn't live together anymore because my dad was just too overwhelmed with everything. What exactly was overwhelming him? I had no idea. He didn't even say goodbye to me in person. He texted me one last time after he moved out and told me to be good. That was it. I didn't see him after that, and soon enough my parents were separated. Since my state doesn't have a long waiting period, my mother got to keep the house and had full custody of my brother and me. My dad did have visiting rights, but he hasn't used them so far, so I don't know what's up with that. As if that wasn't bad enough, about 2 months ago my mother told me she had been dating this guy, let's call him Robert, for almost 3 months. They were in love, and she didn't want to waste time since she wasn't getting any younger. That's why they had gotten engaged. I barely had time to process that my mother was seeing somebody new when she told me she was engaged, and this person was going to be my stepdad. It was a lot to take in, and I was really not happy about it because I thought 5 months was too little time to get to know what kind of person her fiancé was. But she told me not to worry about it. She introduced me to him 2 weeks later, and he seemed really closed off and aloof with me. However, he behaved quite differently with my brother and was very playful with him. At the time, I thought it was because my brother was only 4 years old, so it was probably easier to be more playful with him. But a couple of weeks later, my mother told me something that completely changed my perspective of both of them. 2 weeks ago, my mother sat me down and informed me that the reason she and her fiancé got engaged so quickly was because he had been offered a great position and he was about to take it up. But for that, they would have to move away and live out of state, so they intended on leaving me here with my grandmother because she didn't think I would want to leave everything behind with them. However, I told her I would be fine with moving away if it meant I could stay with my mom because I had already had my dad walk out on me, and I didn't want the same with my mother. But she tried to convince me it was a bad idea because my school was here, all my friends were here, and I was happier here. I insisted on accompanying her. Eventually, she blurted it out. She wanted me to stay back because Robert only wanted my brother to come along with them because he was young, and he could still build a good relationship with him. But I was too old, and I would never be his daughter in the true sense. Apparently, he didn't like that I had told my mother 5 months was too quick to be engaged to somebody she didn't know properly. He thought I was still stuck mentally in the time when my mother and father were married and wouldn't adjust to him. My mother believed the same, which is why she wanted me to stay and figure out my life on my own. I was really hurt by this opinion of hers because, if nobody else, I expected my mother to be on my side and not abandon me just because Robert wanted her to. It's not that I had any issue living with my grandmother. She's a wonderful person, and I really love her, but I also love my mom, so I was really hurt. I tried to argue with her, but it was just not worth it. So I told her I didn't want to wait until they moved away. I wanted to move in with my grandmother that day. Of course, it wasn't possible to arrange the move that day, but within a few days, I was packed and ready to move out. My mother tried to convince me that she still loved me, but this was just her looking out for herself because she really loved me and wanted to give herself a shot at happiness. For the last couple of days I spent at home, I didn't even speak to my mother, and I didn't say goodbye to her on the day I left. To be honest, I didn't think it was worth it. The only person I actually said goodbye to was my little brother because I was definitely going to miss him. Since then, I've been living with my grandma, and she has been very empathetic. My grandma, for the record, is my mother's mom. I have absolutely no relationship with my other grandparents, which is not surprising because they barely had a relationship with my father. She has been exceptionally kind and caring, and life has been pretty easy so far with her because she really seems to love me. She thinks what my mother is doing is horrible. Apart from the time it takes to get to and from school, everything is pretty great here. I keep in touch with my brother and call my mom every evening just to speak to him. We don't speak to each other even then. 3 days ago, I celebrated my birthday at home. To be fair, I didn't organize the party, it was my grandma. She invited a couple of my close friends from school by stalking me on Facebook and some select relatives. It was a huge surprise to me, and it cheered me up because I had been feeling really low after my mother dropped me off here. After we cut the cake, my grandmother announced the gift she had for me, and that was a huge surprise. She told me that. For now, her lawyer is going to act as the trustee for the property, but as soon as I turn 18, it's all mine. That was the best news I had received in quite some time, and I had no intention of sharing it with my mother. But yesterday, I found out she had been told about this gift from my grandmother, probably by someone at the party. I don't know who, and it doesn't matter now. I was really annoyed when she called me last evening to tell me she had heard about the gift my grandmother was giving me. After speaking to Robert, they decided he wanted to adopt me as long as I convinced my grandmother to transfer the ownership of that property to him. I don't know why, but she actually expected me to be happy about this news because now I could finally come along with them. I was not happy at all and told her I would not be doing anything of this sort, and there was no need for her to call me anymore. Then I hung up. She called again after a couple of minutes, but this time I didn't pick up. Then she texted me, and here is the text she sent. "I'm really sorry. If you felt bad that I was trying to play by Robert's rules and live life on his terms, but you need to understand that after your dad and I got divorced, he was the only person who was really there for me. Of course, I had my family to support me, but that's different. He was there for me emotionally and even financially. You don't know about it because I have never let you feel it or even spoken to you about it because I don't want you to think negatively of your father, but he's not exactly a generous man. The settlement and alimony I'm receiving from him are absolutely dismal, and the child support is ridiculously low. I hope you haven't forgotten that your father was the primary breadwinner of our family, not me. I'm lucky he left the house to me because otherwise, I probably wouldn't have been able to afford rent. Our lifestyle has always been expensive, you know that. I never had to worry about money when I was with your father, but after he left, things changed, and I couldn't let you feel that. Even after picking up extra shifts at work, I couldn't match your father's income. When I started dating Robert, he was the one who stepped up. I know he has not been kind to you, but that's just because he has had past relationships, where children have become a bone of contention and eventually led to a breakup. We have to think about his trauma as well. Also, I knew my mother would definitely take great care of you, so I knew I was leaving you in good hands. It's not like I abandoned you. You were living with your grandmother, and even you know she would never let you feel alone. I just wish you could think about my happiness. Now that I have arranged for you to come with us, I want you to take us up on that offer and do what Robert expects of you so the two of us can be together. At least your brother misses you a lot. I know you're angry, but I also know you love me, and I love you, so reply soon. I love you. That message gave me pause, but the last part really got under my skin just because, she wanted to do everything Robert asked her to. She expected me to do the same. It was ridiculous, entitled, and weak, and I thought my mother had lost all individuality. So even though that message initially softened me, it eventually left a bitter taste in my mouth. I replied to her after half an hour and told her I would not do anything Robert asked me to, and she could move away with him and leave me with my grandmother as she initially planned. I had nothing more to say to her because, honestly, her behavior was very disappointing. When I spoke to my grandmother about it, she told me that no matter what happens, she's not transferring the ownership of that property to Robert because she barely knows him and definitely does not trust him. She was pretty sure he would just sell the apartment, and I wouldn't get a single cent out of it. So, in a way, it's good I didn't agree to my mother's proposition. However, she wasn't going to take no for an answer. This morning, she showed up at my grandma's place with my brother. Luckily, I was at school when she came by. As soon as I saw her when I entered the living room, my grandmother wasted no time filling me in on the purpose of my mother's visit. My grandma told me she was here to talk to me in person about the proposition she had suggested last night, which I had ignored. I clarified that I had not ignored anything. I had replied to my mother's message and had been very clear about what I wanted. I wanted her to stick to her initial plan because I was not going to convince my grandmother to transfer the property to Robert since we did not trust him, and I had been very clear about it. So, I didn't know why she was still confused. I was very curt and had a big-time tone, but can you blame me? Anyway, my mother started crying and said she was just trying to make everyone happy, but no matter how hard she tried, it just didn't work. I got really pissed off that she was sitting here in the living room crying when it should actually be me because, if anything, I have been the one who's been treated like absolute crap by both my parents. So I told her to cut it out and said she had it totally backward. She wasn't trying to make everyone happy, she was just trying to make herself happy and expected everyone to bend over backward just for that. Maybe everyone else was willing to do that, but not me. I had a life ahead of me, and I was not going to ruin it by running after her, trying to make sure she was all right. That caught her by surprise, and soon after, she left. Later, I realized she had blocked me, and now I feel kind of guilty about what I said. So, I want to ask, am I the asshole for telling my mother she was selfish and only cared about her happiness? Update 1. Hi everyone, first of all, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment on my original post. It really opened my eyes, and yeah, I guess there are a lot of points I didn't consider before. It hadn't even occurred to me that my mother's relationship with Robert might have been going on since before the divorce. She might just be telling us about it now because it's easier and more convenient for her since the divorce is done, and we would be none the wiser. Honestly, the reason I hadn't thought about it was because, no matter what, I couldn't imagine my mother to be a cheater, but now I'm honestly not sure. She could be, for all I know. Anyway, that's really none of my business anymore, because she has made it sufficiently clear she wants nothing to do with me. The only way it's inconveniencing me is because I can't speak to my brother anymore, and I miss him. He and I always got along really well, and I hate to think that he might be Robert's kid, as a lot of you have suggested. I'm trying not to think about it, but now that people have started talking about it, it's very hard for me to ignore. I really do want to find out the truth, but I'm scared. I have discussed these possibilities with my grandmother at length for the past couple of days after I made that post, and while we haven't been able to come to a conclusion about what is the truth, it has become very difficult for us to think about my mother in the same way. I feel like talking to my father about this might give us a lot of insight, but I don't even know if he would want to discuss this with us. So far, it's been 4 days since my mother visited us, and we have had no contact with her since then. On the first day, my mother had blocked me, but later on, my grandmother told me she had blocked her as well. It's kind of ungrateful of her, to be fair. My grandmother has been taking care of me without even expecting my mother to pay child support because my grandmother has money of her own. It's out of pure kindness and love for me that my grandmother is taking care of me. I can't imagine anybody giving up their time of relaxation after retirement to take care of their grandkids, but my grandmother is doing exactly that, and I feel like my mother should be grateful for that. But instead, she has blocked her. There are just a lot of things I'm angry with my mother about, and there are a lot of questions I still have no answers to. I'm just really hoping that, eventually, it will all come out in the open. Update 2. Hey everyone, this is going to be a bit of a long update, because today, around the evening, my father came by to visit. My grandmother had apparently contacted him, but she hadn't told me about it because she wasn't sure if he would come by, and she didn't want to give me false hopes. Anyway, he did visit as soon as he found out that my mother was engaged to Robert. There have been a lot of revelations, and I'm still trying to process them, but I'll try to talk about it here. I was quite surprised to see him, but even more surprised when he hugged me and told me he was really sorry about everything. Eventually, he sat me down and started telling my grandmother and me everything he knew. He told me that he and my mother had started falling out of love a long time ago, but they had stayed together for the sake of my happiness because they didn't want to break up this family and put me through the trouble of coming from a broken home. Then, about 3 years ago, my dad started an affair with a coworker. He really wanted to tell my mother about it but never found the courage to do so. Eventually, she found out about it herself about a year ago, and that was when she filed for divorce. She told him she would keep quiet about it only if he stayed away from us. She set forth a bunch of conditions. He would leave the house to her entirely, she would have full custody, and even though he would have visitation rights, he would not be allowed to visit us until she said she was fine with it. She had also demanded an exorbitant amount of settlement, alimony, and child support, and he had agreed to all of it. The only thing he wanted in return was that she would keep his affair a secret and never tell me anything about it because he didn't want me to hate him and think of him as a cheater. So far, she had held her end of the deal, but it had come at the cost of having a relationship with me. He also apologized to me for always being a workaholic and never doing enough to build a bond with me. In his defense, it was my mother who always wanted more, and that's why he was forced to work all the time. Because the kind of lifestyle she wanted, he couldn't afford unless he was slogging day and night. He told me it was not an excuse, but even then, he wanted me to know it was not entirely his fault. I kind of understand, but it's still difficult for me to come to terms with it. Anyway, he told me the reason he had broken his promise to my mother and came to see me without asking her first was that in the message my grandmother had left him, she had mentioned Robert by name and said she wanted to ask if my dad knew him. That's why he had rushed to come over, because apparently, not only did he know Robert, but he also knew exactly what kind of person he was and had come by to warn us about him. Apparently, my mother, my dad, and Robert had all been part of the same circle in college. My parents had been together, but Robert had always had a crush on my mother. On the night before graduation, they had all been out drinking, and Robert confessed his feelings to my mother. At the time, my mom was with my dad, so she obviously rejected his advances. But she didn't tell my father about any of it until 2 weeks later. Then she told him she was confused about her feelings, so they went on a break. My dad told me they were on a break for almost 2 months, and in the meantime he had a couple of friends who said she had gone out on a date with Robert but it didn't go well, and eventually she came back to him. Once they patched things up, my dad told her he didn't want her speaking to Robert. Again, because that would make him uncomfortable. And for a while she agreed. However, later that year, he found out she had never cut him off, and that led to a huge fight, after which they almost broke up. But then Robert visited my dad's apartment after that fight, and they ended up in a physical brawl because Robert thought that was going to impress my mother. Instead, she got mad at him for being violent, especially after she had already told him she just wanted to be friends with him and nothing more. So, eventually, she cut him off. My dad told me Robert had always been unhinged and had never been up to any good. After my mother cut him off after college, he moved away, and nobody heard from him for years. But now he thinks my mother and Robert must have reconnected a couple of years ago because she had mentioned hearing from a couple of friends that he was back in the city. He wasn't sure exactly at what point my mother started speaking to Robert again. But if they were engaged, that definitely meant she had also been cheating on him, and all the conditions she had set were null and void. My dad told me he's going to confront my mother, but before he did that, I wanted to speak to her and get to the bottom of what was going on. So, he has promised me he's going to wait for that. And after I'm done speaking to my mother and hearing her out, he is free to do whatever he wants. I'm still trying to process all of this, so it's complicated in my head because I really don't know who to believe. Neither of my parents has been good to me, and it's just really messy. Update 3, I finally spoke to my mother, and I didn't tell her about my meeting with my father. I just wanted to talk to her independently and see what she had to say. She had blocked me, so I had no other choice but to visit her and show up unannounced 3 days ago. My dad visited me, and yesterday, I finally worked up the courage to talk to my mother. She seemed surprised to see me at the door, but still invited me in. Thankfully, Robert was not at home at the time, so I could make myself comfortable and speak to her freely. Initially, I apologized to her, but that was just for show so she would talk to me openly. I beat around the bush for a while and told her I was just finding it very difficult to accept Robert into our family so soon, and that's why I had been acting out. Then I got down to business. I hinted to her that I had been thinking about it, and it just didn't add up that my mother had met someone as wonderful as Robert so soon after her divorce. It just seemed too convenient. That was the perfect opportunity for her to come clean about the truth that she had known Robert from her college days, but she didn't say that. She just told me she was really lucky to have found him, and that was it. I knew for a fact that my dad was telling the truth about all 3 of them being friends since college, since he had pictures. The only thing I was doubtful about was the authenticity of the story he had told me about the 3 of them. But as soon as my mother lied to me point blank about never having known him earlier, I knew who to trust. But then my mother decided to make it worse for herself by telling me she had never intended to let me know about it, but the reason she had rushed into this engagement with Robert and agreed to move away with him was because she just really wanted to forget all about my father and every trace of him from her life. Then she told me about his affair, the one thing she had made my father sacrifice everything for, and promised him she would never let me know. After that, I didn't see any reason to sit around and talk to her. I just told her I would see her later and then left. As soon as I was out of there, I called my father up and told him he was free to do whatever he wanted to do because now I knew the truth, and I knew my dad was not lying about anything he said. So now my mother is going to finally get hit back by karma. I'm not saying my dad is suddenly absolved of everything, but at least he's not as bad as my mom. Update 4. Hey everyone, I have many things to talk about. Firstly, everyone was concerned about whether my brother was my dad's kid or not, and frankly, I was too. But last month, after my dad confronted my mother, they had a paternity test conducted, and thankfully my brother is indeed my dad's kid. So now my dad is fighting for full custody, and since I'm 15, I can just say I want him to have full custody and they'll take that into account. However, I'm still living with my grandmother because, even though my dad is trying to fix things, there are still many issues we have to work on, and until then, I just want to live with my grandmother because I'm always sure of her. My mother was furious when she found out that my visit to her had only been to find out the truth about her and Robert, and since then she has only unblocked me once to curse me out and then blocked me again. We haven't spoken since. As for Robert, He dumped my mother as quickly as he had gotten engaged to her as soon as he found out that my dad was fighting to get the alimony and child support reduced. Apparently, he had been lying to my mother all along because there really was no job offer. His plan had been to join his uncle in his business, which already wasn't doing too well, and he was going to use my mother's money to fund that. Obviously, that was the only reason he was asking my mother to convince me to transfer the property my grandmother had gifted to me. They had been together for the past 2 years, and he had been stringing her along for all of it. So basically, my mother got screwed over, and instead of being ashamed of it, she has been telling all her friends about it just to badmouth Robert. But she doesn't realize her friends have been gossiping about her, and that's how my dad found out, and eventually I did as well. I'm just really thankful that my mother decided she wanted nothing to do with me as soon as Robert said the word, because I would hate to be stuck with her right now. Anyway, my dad and I have decided we are going to try to work on our relationship, and he has promised me he's going to try to be a better father to me from now on. As soon as he manages to get full custody or even shared custody of my brother, we are going to try to be a happy and functional family. I don't know about the functional bit, but the least we can do is try to be happy.